that is taking decisions for us. I mean, just before the invasion of Iraq, I mean, millions of people went on the street to demonstrate against it, but still the government went ahead. And I think many of us around the world feel inspired by this. But at the same time, I also don't want to be naive, and I share sort of Francis' concerns. I mean, you know, these are processes, the hard bits are starting. I mean, I'm so happy for what's been happening in Tunis and Egypt, but we also see now, of course, counter-revolutionary movements, and the hard work is still beginning. But yes, I mean, I very share the caller's frustration, or I can understand where she is coming from. I mean, I think there are lots of struggles around the world that are not being covered, especially, of course, in Africa. Okay, well, let me get a caller in from Pennsylvania. Mike, thanks for your patience. What would you like to ask?
I just wanted to generalize the discussion a bit. Essential to democracy, of course, is freedom. And a corollary of that, obviously, is women's rights. But eventually, it's just a question of when, you have to also face the question about homosexuality, that is to say, gender roles and a freedom from a society's demand that they be fulfilled in certain specific ways. So I think homosexuality eventually is going to have to be tackled, and I'd like your discussants to comment on this, specifically in Egypt, actually.
Well, actually, so I was going to put this to Professor Al-Mahdi and ask, you know, these kind of issues. Now, of course, that's a very sensitive topic for the Arab world. At what point do you see discussions opening up on these kind of issues, where they can be considered less taboo and less difficult to discuss openly?
I think the important thing to do is not to project one society's priorities at a historical moment, and to project those priorities on other societies. In the US, homosexuality became a societal issue at a certain point of time in history. And maybe, or maybe not, this would be an issue which societies would like to mobilize on in Egypt or Syria or other places. But I think the important thing here is to respect the timing and to respect choices of people. You know, 5 years ago, no one thought that Arabs could mobilize that intensely on a democracy. We talked about Arab exceptionalism. And you never know, but I think, again, it's very important not to make analogies, not to take issues in ready-made agendas, whether for women's rights, homosexuality, or whatever it is, and try to shift it, try to import it to other contexts at a different historical.
Well, let me get a question to Dr. Hasso, and just ask a question that came in from a viewer by the name of JC Kirby, because this issue of religion comes up when it comes to these kind of topics. And JC Kirby wrote in saying, religion is the root of gender inequality. It should be seen for the man-made construct it is and done away with. And I presume that's going to be a very rare sentiment in the Middle East itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very problematic way to think about religious belief and religious identity. I started by saying that women and men, boys and girls, are going to want different things. People live their religious identities in very different ways. So I definitely, you know, wouldn't want to, you know, just picking up on what Rabab said, wouldn't want to be projecting actually a very individual kind of approach to thinking about religion. If we think about the United States, actually most people are very religious. I want to pick up, though, on the question of sexuality, because we know that many conservative, including restrictive governments, have sort of manipulated these ideas of cultural and moral disintegration, foreign invasion, to actually sustain their governments. It's one of those issues that's very convenient, has been very convenient for repressive governments to manipulate and negotiate with other forces. So, you know, I see a whole range of possibilities. But I agree with Rabab that we should allow people to do what they're doing, which is they're struggling, they're articulating, they're coming up with new possibilities. I think they're pushing for an expansive notion of dignity. And when you do that, a lot of things a lot of things are included. But she's right that we shouldn't want it to look the way it looks, you know, in New York City in the 1960s or something.
Okay, Professor Nadia Al-Ali, let me ask you about the sort of the prospects of a greater entrepreneurial spirit being expressed for women in the Middle East. We've seen in parts of Africa, for example, that entrepreneurship has actually allowed women to get a stronger place in the workforce and take more control of their lives. Do you see in this new changing landscape of the Middle East that perhaps women can play a greater role as entrepreneurs and perhaps improve their position that way?
Yes, but I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, when we see developments, economic developments in a country like Iraq, there's lots of push for a neoliberal capitalist push for women and men to become entrepreneurs. This is at the expense of women being involved in the public sector, and historically in the region women have been much more involved in the public sector. This is at the expense of welfare provisions of the state. So I think it's a very sort of narrow angle to look at it. Women entrepreneurs, yes, of course it is nice and we have it in the Gulf, but I don't think it really addresses the wider issues of socioeconomic rights, and I'm very concerned about this neoliberal agenda of, let's train some women to become entrepreneurs. And actually we saw that in Iraq. There were lots of training programs funded by the American government to try to train Iraqi women, to become entrepreneurs. And I think this is very problematic.
Let's get in a quick call. Mohammed in Minnesota in the USA. Go ahead, please.
My question is, I'm asking the professors, do they want the Arab women to behave like Western women in terms of homosexuality? Homosexuality and also the covering of the hijab.
Okay.
They want to behave like a Western.
Mohammed, let me put that question, interesting question, let me put it to Professor Rabab Al-Mahdi. Let's get your perspective on that. Do you see that there is a parallel to be had? I mean, Mohammed's question is fairly direct.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of women or Egyptian women. I can speak on behalf of myself, saying, of course, I want women to behave the way they see fit, and I want them to be entitled to their own bodies, whether they cover those bodies, whether they don't cover them, what kind of dress code they choose, what kind of sexual orientation they choose. Of course, absolutely, I want them to be free to make such choices. And I don't think those choices should be divided on binaries of West-East.
All right, a quick thought, Professor Al-Mahdi.
Exactly, yes.
Just literally 30 seconds. Has the Western media let down the image of Arab women with its coverage? Just a quick thought.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have no doubt about it. The women featured on Time, the cover of Time magazine, as Egyptian women, as three of them are my students from the American University in Cairo. Is this representative of Egyptian women? The
Professor?
Western media is obsessed with people who look like people in the West, not Egyptian women in factories, in villages.
Unfortunately, I have to stop you there, and thank you all three for being with us.
Women.
I'm so sorry to stop you because we're out of time, but thank you all for joining in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Remember, you can watch a podcast of the show on iTunes. Today we feature our conversation with world-renowned singer Yusuf Islam, famous for his rock ballads in the 1970s. On the next show, rape as a weapon of war. As women continue to be exposed to extreme sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we speak with world-renowned feminist and activist Eve Ensler about her project to help the victims of rape crimes there.